So welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. Um, Tonight we are going to continue on our progress through the first volume, volume 1, of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And we are approaching the end of this volume, and we'll move on to volume 2 in a couple of weeks. Just a couple of words. Sometime in the next month or two, we'll be offering refuge vows again, and as well as bodhisattva vows. Bodhisattva vows are peculiar to the Mahayana stage of the path, which is what we're going to be working on in volume 2. We're going to be reading about the Mahayana stage, and they are the prerequisite and precursor to entering the Vajrayana, which will be the third volume. To the extent that we do that. And so that's something to look forward to, I think. And if you wish, you're planning on continuing with the course and taking the next section, which is going to start in 2 or 3 weeks. You might want to purchase volume 2 of the Profound Treasury. You can get it in PDF, and you can also get it in paper or in hardback. So, any other announcements that we need, Barry or Michael? Okay. I see Barry putting up his arms. And with that, we'll turn the meeting over to Michael, who is going to present the first chapter that we're covering tonight, which is the chapter 66 on the path of unification.
Okay, so begin with a bow. So yes, I'll be talking about the chapter titled The Path of Unification. But before I start and before I forget, I wanted to let everyone know that I'll be leaving tomorrow for a week and a half meditation retreat. And so I probably won't be part of these gatherings again until a week from Monday. But my absence has nothing to do with anything that happened tonight, at least not yet. So we're going to talk about the path of unification, chapter 66. And I have to say, I struggled a bit with this chapter. Sometimes I can pinpoint experiences that Trungpa Rinpoche describes, and sometimes it's a bit of a struggle. And I had to really work with this chapter a bit, and actually did some supplemental reading as well from Trungpa Rinpoche that was helpful to me. So I'll share what I understand, and we'll go from there. So basically, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that the 5 paths altogether are really a Mahayana teaching, that the paths that come after the path of unification, the path of seeing, path of meditation, and the path of no more learning, or sometimes called the path of accomplishment, relate entirely to the Mahayana. So the entire logic, even of the first 2 paths, accumulation and unification, is directing us toward a Mahayana understanding. And in that sense goes beyond some of the concepts that you ordinarily would encounter on just a simple Hinayana level. So Trungpa Rinpoche used the 5 paths as a bridge to connect the Hinayana teachings with the Mahayana. And with the path of unification, we're really talking about a very fruitional take on the Hinayana, a very complete realization of individual liberation, individual liberation. And in regard to this, I just wanted to share a little bit from the questions and answers in the 1973 seminary transcript, because it kind of gets at how these teachings, the 5 paths, are transitional. And it starts with a question that somebody asks him about whether there should be a change in the meditation practice. And he says, you don't have to change particularly. Now we're talking about something entirely different, and maybe it is highly theoretical. And the studies we're going to make from today onward are theoretical studies. We begin to go beyond our territory, so to speak. We are still samsaric people. Others are bodhisattvas and arhats, and we are talking about their disciplines. but it would be very useful to know where they're at, so to speak, at the same time. But it's slightly like retelling a bedtime story. It has that quality to it. I meant to warn you. So he's asked by a questioner, are we still practicing shamatha at this point? Trungpa Rinpoche, yeah, I think so at this point. Yes, shamatha practice has all the potentials of the rest of the whole thing. We can't change our techniques every day when we have a talk. Tonight, you're trying to do it. It becomes a human potential kind of project somewhat. Questioner, you're drawing a map of some kind of path which we can't even relate to experientially. Is the point some sort of inspirational or something like that? Trungpa Rinpoche, well, on the other hand, you might have the elements of everything we've discussed in your practice. The actual strict discipline is related with shamatha practice, but you might have flashes or a certain glimpse of anything up to the Maha'ati level. That's possible. So one of the purposes in studying this material is that we do recognize the possibilities that occur in meditation practice, as well as in our post-meditation practice. And Trungpa Rinpoche uses a lot of metaphors and analogies to point to the experiences along the path. And some may resonate for us now, and some may resonate for us later. I think in this regard, it's useful to just think for a moment again about the three prajnas that we actually just talked about maybe 2-3 chapters back. But the three prajnas are hearing, contemplating, and meditating. And again, with hearing or reading, we develop some conceptual understanding of some point in the teachings, and it gives us some direction to begin to understand. With contemplation or contemplating, we try to make what we've read more personal. We try to make more of a heart connection or a gut level connection even with the teachings. How does this apply to us? What does this mean in terms of my life? And then with meditation practice, we develop the clarity to see something in the teachings directly. And the point is that these aren't really just 3 steps, like we just go up 3 steps of stairs, but they're really recursive. And what happens is, as we experience something in meditation, that may change our understanding or how we hear, and how we hear and our understanding, or change in understanding and how we hear may change how we contemplate. And that again may have some impact on our meditation practice. And the result of this, in my experience at least, is when I've reread different chapters, different books by Trungpa Rinpoche, or other Buddhist teachers for that matter, but in particular Trungpa Rinpoche, because I'm most familiar with his teachings. Sometimes something's really stood out. There's a sentence, a paragraph, an idea that really strikes me strongly. So much so that it's almost hard for me to believe it was there before, because I didn't hear it or see it that way when I came to it before. So I think if we were to begin this book again, not that we're going to, I think people would have that experience, that there are things that would strike you or me in different places that we maybe didn't notice before. And so it's worth coming back and studying things again and again, because our understanding changes as our practice changes and our realization changes. And in particular, with the hearing, contemplating, and meditating, in the beginning, teachings may feel external to us. But as we engage with the 3 prajnas, hearing, contemplating, and meditating, they become more personal, more immediate, and more direct. You could say that we come to identify more with the teachings, or as Trungpa Rinpoche sometimes said, we experience a shift in allegiance in our thinking and in our perceptions. And I think this is one point that's kind of at the crux of the path of unification. So I want to read one paragraph that's actually kind of in the middle, but it kind of gets at what I think is one aspect of the path of unification, which is that we do come to identify fully with the teachings, and in particular with the Four Noble Truths. The reason you may find it difficult to practice and to put into effect whatever you have learned and studied is not because you're stupid and unable to comprehend. It is not that you are lazy, slow, or pleasure-oriented. None of those reasons apply. The only reason you are not able to relate with the teachings is that you are unable to identify with them as personal experience. If you're able to identify with the teachings as personal experience, your intellect naturally flows out, and your meditation experience and awareness flows out as well. Energy and joy in practicing flow out because there is devotion to the path, which has become an integral part of your experience. In order to create an effective marriage, a couple has to develop love for one another. Similarly, you need to personalize the teachings in order to unite with them and bring them into your system, into your whole being. The teachings are based on personal experience, personally applied to individuals, rather than on theoretical speculation or metaphysics. When you identify with the teachings as personal experience, there is well being and ultimate security. The teachings are alive and they apply to your day to day living. So I think that's really, when we're talking about unification, ultimately, that's really what we're talking about, is how to bring or experiencing the teachings um, in a very direct way, in a very personal way. When we begin, for instance, studying something like the truth of suffering, at first it may seem something external to us, and we kind of, pick and choose and say, well, what does this mean? But as we come to practice and come to and when we approach it that way, by the way, sometimes it'll almost feel like, well, these teachings are making me suffer, because we don't make the connection with the fact that all it's doing is pointing out what's always been there and what's always been our experience in terms of confusion, at least. And as we come to identify and make a more personal connection with the teachings, the nature of our relationship to the teachings, to practice, and to reality as a whole begins to change. So the path of unification, we actually already talked about 6 chapters back, and I'm going to refer back to that chapter very briefly. So we actually began talking about the path of unification a couple of weeks back. And what Trungpa Rinpoche said there is the second path is the path of unification, in which your actions and your psychological state are beginning to work together. When you sit in meditation, you begin to develop a glimpse of sanity, a glimpse of the Bodhisattva path. And again, this is because the 5 paths ultimately are directed toward a Mahayana understanding and Mahayana realization. So that's the glimpse of the Bodhisattva path. The second path is called the path of unification, or Jorlam in Tibetan, because we join our body and mind and all our efforts together. So in the chapter that we read for this week, he begins talking about the path of unification, and says that when a person has developed shamatha vipassana practice, not only in the meditative state alone, but on the meditation and action level as well. In other words, the Vipassana experience of meditation in everyday life, where we come back to awareness again and again in our experience. When that becomes increasingly a more stable, more frequent, ultimately a 24-hour practice, that person has begun to approach the second of the 5 paths, which is the path of unification. The path of unification connects or unites the ordinary samsaric person with the level or of higher beings who are able to turn the wheel of Dharma dispassionately. And the first thing that he talks about is the meditative experience here, which he says is completely properly the completely properly non-conceptualized state. So here again, we're talking about very direct experience. Experience having let go of or beginning to see through the workings of ego, beginning to let go of and understand the impact that the kleshas can have on our lives, and beginning to renounce the kleshas. It's the final realization of the desolateness of the meditative state. You begin to have very solid and tangible feelings of the 3 marks of existence. Suffering, impermanence, and egolessness are completely understood and actualized in your practice. So again, we're talking about a complete identification with the teachings in our experience, in our perceptions, and in our practice. And again, this is a very fruitional level of Hinayana. So in regard to this, he talks about 4 discriminations that develop. And in some of the readings that I did by Trungpa Rinpoche, he actually says that the 4 discriminations relate directly to each of the 4 noble truths, which that I had not heard before, but it's interesting. So the first one is heat, which he says is not heat in the sense of generating yogic heat, tumo or chandali practice, but it's more like heat in the sense of an animal going in heat in the mating season. there's a possibility of mating with somebody. You have a whiff of that. Similarly, you get a hint of the shunyata possibility. So again, we're talking about shunyata, which is a Mahayana realization. But you begin to get a hint of that because you no longer are afraid of possible involvement with the non-ego realm, non-ego doctrine, and non-ego livelihood. You've given up all your desires. They've gone away. So you no longer feel the desolateness, loneliness, and pain of the three marks of existence. Interestingly, when he said desolateness of the meditative state earlier, I actually looked up desolate today because I was curious exactly what it means. Over the years, I found that Trungpa Rinpoche is very precise in his language. Supposedly, he had an Oxford English dictionary that he consulted quite frequently. And desolate, the first meaning of desolate is abandoned or devoid of inhabitants, which I think kind of resonates with the loneliness experience of the Hinayana that we talked about. But the second meaning is forsaken, which connects with the idea of renunciation, renouncing. And I think here we're talking about exactly that on the fruitional level of renunciation of the Mahayana, where we've actually reversed our attitude towards samsara and have begun to see that that samsaric pursuits don't lead to happiness and in fact lead to suffering. That in fact that the best that samsara offers is temporary happiness that then becomes painful when circumstances change. So that we're able to begin to consider the possibility, as he said, of non-ego involvement, of living in a non-ego way. And that is the beginning of a hint of shunyata. The second discrimination is peak or semo. In some texts that I read, it's actually called extreme heat, which is kind of interesting. But it indicates something of a crescendo, where he says it's a sensitive point in your development, a once in a lifetime experience, because it cannot be achieved unless you're able to relate with the insight that you're developing as potentially explosive. You begin to, there's the possibility for the first time of becoming superhuman. There's a sense of penetratingness as well. You feel a sharpness happening inside you as if you'd swallowed a razor blade and it's just about to cut you from the inside out. Um, I have to say, this is one of the experiences I'm kind of questioning whether I can actually relate to that directly. So I'm still contemplating that one. But I think partly perhaps what it means, and again, I'm just sharing my understanding and open to any other interpretations people have, is that what happens on this level, and we're here, if it does connect with the noble truth, it's connected with the origin of suffering, with beginning to see through ego and understand that clinging to ego is the origin of suffering. And it's not necessarily that we're let go of the whole thing, but it's something like if you understand how a magician's trick works, you still have the appearance, but it loses, it doesn't have quite the same pull or same draw. It's not quite as believable as it was before. And we're beginning to see through that. And in fact, seeing through ego is an explosive insight. And so that's perhaps at least one interpretation of what he means there. So then the third discrimination is patience. You develop patience for nothing's been censored in the teachings, he says. And the teachings are a part of your system, and you're not impatiently looking forward to the next excitement. So again, part of what we experience is that we have glimpses of different experiences, and we're willing to allow ourselves to develop organically, naturally. We run into trouble if we look at experiences that we have in meditation or that we read about and study for that matter from an ego point of view. Because if we look at it from an ego point of view, we'll either try to create experiences that we aren't really genuinely having, or we'll get discouraged and frustrated or self-judgmental. So it's important is to be patient with our progress on the path and to appreciate what we do recognize, what we do experience, and be patient with the development that occurs as we continue to make progress. Then the fourth is higher dharma, the fourth discrimination. Having developed conviction and powerful mental recollection, you begin to have the idea that you actually are a holder of the dharma. So at this point, there really is, I think, a complete identification, at least with the Hinayana teachings. And this prepares us for the next path in the Mahayana, the path of seeing. It's interesting because as I read about the path of unification, it had more names, I think, than any other path. Path of joining, path of junction, path of application, path of preparation. So depending on what text you read, you'll get a different translation for the same basic experience that it's pointing to. So with the 4 discriminations come the 5 perceptions. And this also we studied back in a previous chapter. So I'm going to flip back and forth a little bit because I think the description in chapter 60 helps with the description in this chapter 66. So the first perception, he talks about these as psychological sense organs that develop in terms of our practice. So the first perception is faith, which in some texts is also translated as confidence. You have faith in your discovery or confidence in what you're experiencing. We realize, this is again from the previous chapter where we discussed the path of unification. We realize we're not in the dark as far as our practice is concerned. We know our directions, roughly speaking, where we're going and where we are. The second is exertion. It includes diligence, perseverance, and working hard. The good news is that there is an alternative to samsaric existence. This again is the truth of cessation of suffering in particular, that there is an alternative to samsaric experience. And this brings both discipline and delight. You're not tired of what you're trying to do, but highly energized. And again, before we realize the isness or suchness of the truth we've been told. We experience upliftedness as a result of shamatha discipline, and from that we develop further exertion. And he actually compares this to being served a dish in a restaurant that we like, so we keep ordering it again and again because we know that we're going to get something good. So similarly, exertion does not mean taking pains, it means appreciation. Then the third perception is recollection, which he says you're relating with the teachings with Vipassana as the basis of both meditation and action or post-meditation experience and sitting meditation. Awareness is 24-hour work. Your only interest is in awakening your mind of enlightenment or bodhicitta. And again, in the previous chapter on the path of unification, recollection means that what you have done and what you have experienced are not forgotten, but remain as part of your awareness and mindfulness. There's a sense of respect and genuine appreciation for what you have received and what you're doing. Then the fourth perception was one-pointedness, which he says is almost the level of obsession. Even ordinary thoughts, such as fantasy of aggression or fantasies of sex, become part of the inspiration for the path. Ordinary thoughts become workable as part of the complete conviction of absorption. There's a feeling of well-being. And in the previous chapter, you never lose track of anything. You develop tremendous awareness. Your mind becomes very focused, very accurate. You appreciate sense perceptions, but you're not trapped by them, and you don't create samsaric karmic problems. And then finally, the fifth perception is intellect or knowledge or prajna. Prajna is the complete experience of Vipassana. Whatever happens in your life becomes tremendously sharp and fantastically revealing by its own condition, rather than according to your own preconceived ideas or ego's version of things. And again, referring back, you understand how to see things, how to separate various experiences. There might still be occasional upheavals, both experiences of satisfaction or achievement and experiences of obstacles and doubts, but you can clearly separate what should be avoided from what should be cultivated. There is both clarity and discrimination. So those are the 5 perceptions that develop on the path of unification. And then the last point of the 5 powers, which is simply that each one of these perceptions need not be sought. Again, that if they develop naturally, organically out of our practice and study, if we engage with the teachings in a wholehearted way. And as he says, the path of unification is complete preparation for the Mahayana, but it's not Mahayana as such. But you've seen the possibilities of treading on the path of the Bodhisattva and becoming a Mahayanist who's fully dedicated to working with sentient beings. So path of unification, path of preparation, path of application, very powerful experiences. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Michael. And going on to the second chapter that we covered tonight, the chapter 67, Ego, the thought that we exist. He starts out by saying that egoism is really the root of samsara, the root of our suffering and confusion, as well as theism, belief in an eternally existing other, like a god, which is its corollary. Because if we believe that I exist, then there has to be an other out there with which I can have a relationship. And in fact, if other is out there, it proves that I exist. The two are in intimate, interconnected relationship, I and other. And so if we believe in self, egoism, the eternal existence of an I, which is what we hope for and kind of feel, then we are automatically believing that others out there have a similar ongoing eternal existence. And we may not necessarily, we could say, well, everything changes and everything dies, but nonetheless, to the extent that we believe that we exist eternally, that we are going to, you've never known anything other than me, I. Therefore, there must be something out there, we think, that exists similarly. And so we posit God in one way or another. And this belief in egoism and theism really is the root of samsara and suffering, according to the Buddhist path. It begins with one thing, the thought that we actually exist and we are actually here, and we don't doubt it. And the problem is that what I am is constantly under attack by age, by change, by loss, by all kinds of things. So we're constantly trying to shore up our own existence. We're constantly trying to buttress this belief that we have in I. And that very attempt to shore it up and buttress it is in itself constant suffering and unhappiness, a feeling of fear, a feeling of loss, and of attempted self-aggrandizement so that we can counteract the loss that we feel is happening to us, like age, for instance. Now, then he goes into the idea of what ego is. We think that ego is one ongoing, continuous thing. But as we begin to meditate more and more, we begin to find out that what we consider to be an ego is just a name for a collection of fragments, a collection of disparate and sort of semi-interconnected events that are occurring in us all the time, thoughts, feelings, emotions, all kinds of things, interactions with the world, appearances, the five senses, and everything that goes on in our mind. This feeling of the interconnectedness and giving it one name has a name in Buddhism. It's called mind. Mind is what interconnects everything. The word for it in Tibetan is sem, and sem means neurotic mind or confused mind. It's the mind that is made up of interconnected events but thinks that it's one thing. He says we do not exist per se, but are a constantly changing stream of events, perceived as the six sense perceptions. The six sense perceptions are objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and finally the sixth one is objects of mind. All of them are just short moments of fickleness, trying to overlap each other, that as I speak, you're seeing the visual image and we put them together, they overlap, and we think that there is one thing there, and that there is one thing here perceiving it. We think, this is a quote, we think we are just one big thing existing here, but we are not one mind at all, but lots of minds jumping around constantly, trying to take shape, trying to maintain themselves. And that is the real essence of suffering, that constant attempt to maintain oneself in the face of the constant dissolution of oneself. We're constantly dying, both in the long sense of dying over a period of decades, and in the short sense, in the sense of every moment, everything is changing. We think that there's an ongoing continuity, and yet every second, every instant, especially when you begin to become aware of your mind, and the constantly changing display of thought, one's mind and one's feelings about the world are changing instant by instant. Now you feel good about it, now you feel mezzo about it, now you feel badly about it, now you feel whatever, elated, now you feel depressed. It goes on and on with this constant feeling of change in one's mental perception of the world, and you can't really distinguish between one's mental perception and the world as it appears to us. They're in unity. So mind, this mind of which is a mixture of both external sense perceptions and internal mental events, is just a patchwork, a habit forming of thoughts. He says it's like the hum of bees. If you perceive a hive of bees from a distance, you just hear one hum, as though it were one thing. But when you get up close, you hear lots of little individual hums. That's the individuality of our thoughts. That's the analogy for mind, for sem. And no more than that, one other thing that helps us, or that seduces us into thinking of mind as one ongoing thing, is memory. We store events or aspects of events, not the whole event, but just little fragments of the events in memory. This memory is called the alaya. It's the storehouse, the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. And all of the experiences that we have in our lives, which are colored by evaluations of good, bad, neutral, all kinds of things, are stored in memory in one degree or another, in fragments. We don't remember the whole thing as it actually happened. We remember aspects of it. And we actually aren't even thinking about it. It's just stored there in potential, in what are called seeds. So for instance, and this is the example I always use, you're not thinking about your mother until the word mother comes out of this mouth, and suddenly there's a memory of your mother. It comes out of the alaya. It was a seed in the alaya, and now it's been triggered by the external world, which is me saying the word mother, and she comes to mind, and some feeling about her as well. So this produces chain reactions of karma, because we have this sense of I, which has a past and an ongoingness into the future. We're constantly reenacting the stories of our past. So for instance, you meet someone on the street whom you don't know, but who looks like your mother, and you start just faintly, perhaps, maybe strongly, reacting to that person as though they were your mother, elements of that reaction. This is karma. This is the way karma works. It's the reliving of memory, the reliving of dream that is stored in your storehouse, your memory, your consciousness, what Freud called the unconscious. And Freud's theory of the unconscious was very similar to the Buddhist idea of the storehouse consciousness, where we store all of these proclivities and dislikes and likes and all of that in the past, that we've accumulated in the past, and that they come out, they are triggered, and they determine the way we act in the present. They influence the way we act, and we no longer see the world as it truly is, as it's arising nakedly in this present moment. We see the world through the veil of our past recollections, these seeds which are triggered into life, and become from memory, they become active mental acts in the present moment. And he calls this a memory bank of good, bad, and neutral, of the past and the future. And this produces the kleshas, the defilements of anger, lust, jealousy, pride, and all the rest. which make us stupid. They make us stupid because we're not reacting to the world in terms of what it really is, in terms of what it is asking us to see and react to. We're reacting to the world through the veil of our past preconceptions. And this is all the mechanism of ego, the belief in a self. Because as we walk down the street and we have this feeling of I, what that feeling of I is referring to is that vague, inchoate sense of this storehouse in us of all the past that we have had, which goes to make up me, my childhood, my adulthood, whatever it may be. And there's this feeling of I-ness that is actually this vague feeling of the Alaya, all that storehouse of stored memory. And those memories are very fragmented, very partial. You take two people and you have them witness an event, and then you ask them what they saw, and each one of them will see something slightly or grossly different. No one sees exactly the same thing because we're all standing in different angles and we're all coming from different pasts, and we see these events of this world differently. And then we store those seeings again in our alaya, and they will influence us in the future. And so we create chain reactions of karma. The chain reactions are the constant reenactment of the stored predilections and aversions as they come out and influence the way we walk down the street, the way we interact with the people and the events of our lives. And this is the action of ego. And it's full of suffering, full of trying to maintain one's sense of well-being, of existence, of ongoingness. He says, we might be able to act out being dignified and together, but if you look into the details of what is going on in you, it is somewhat terrible, deplorable, absurd, and so embarrassing. Can be. It says, when you begin to look at yourself, you feel that the whole thing is somewhat ridiculous. And the only way to deal with this, with what is going on in yourself, with this very complex and elaborate reenactment or enactment of a neurosis, is with meditation, through which you begin to accentuate the notion of the non-existence of your whole being by taking a pinch of your mind and looking at it thoroughly and fully. This is mindfulness. This is shamatha, which is beginning to develop peace. Because when we begin to look at something fully, accurately, without agenda, we are cutting that karmic chain of trying to bolster my own personal well-being and existence. We are just coming here, stepping out of the forward momentum of the dream. And in that stepping out, there is peace. He says, peace does not mean bliss, but that at last there is some rest. A really good nap, Organ Chowan. Years ago, we read that book of his, Our Pristine Mind, and he says that this kind of meditation is like having a really good nap because you get a rest from the turmoil, the anxiety, the constant attempt of ego to maintain itself, to bolster itself, which is so exhausting, so irritating, so depressing. By practicing shamatha, you develop sympathy for yourself and a friendly and healthy attitude. And the reason for that is that we begin to settle in and stop trying to change ourselves, but to simply be there and allow whatever is going on inside in this mind to come out and to see it and to let it appear and disappear as it will, instead of constantly trying to make it better, which is so exhausting. And so we begin to develop a sympathy. He calls it sympathy for oneself. It really is a kind of kindness. And the way in which you can experience this is that as you sit and meditate, as we sit and meditate, and we see our minds come up, and we are failing at meditation, for instance, instead of being aware of the breath, we get lost in thought. The normal tendency is to beat ourselves up for it. Oh, I'm not a good meditator. Oh, I should go back to the breath. Just if we just see it, everything relaxes, everything settles down, and then it's very easy to go back to the breath, back to awareness, because we are developing a kind of kindness for ourselves, that we are ceasing to beat ourselves up, be critical of ourselves. And this is so important. This is really the precursor to the Bodhisattva path, the path of the Mahayana, developing this kind of kindness, which in Sanskrit is called Maitri. In the Pali, it's called metta, for those of you who've done metta meditation. He says, you have actually learned to be with yourself. You are simply learning to be. Breathe out and breathe in and simply exist. We are giving up the notion of self-improvement, and we're just learning to be. You may begin to discover in yourself a kind of hollowness, that one's basic substance is not there. And that's the bad news, as it were, that you actually don't exist, or you may not exist, which is also the good news, because then we don't have to deal with all that. In shamatha, there is a general sense of being unable to hold on or grasp on to anything. You can't. We keep trying to, as we practice our shamatha meditation, to make it solid, ongoing, continuous, and it constantly defeats us. Thoughts come up and interrupt us, and then we say, oh, I have to go back. So sitting also removes psychological pain, because the survival mentality is cut. That is, the more we sit, the more we begin to relax, we begin to give in, and we just do the practice and give up that survival or self-improvement mentality. So the path should begin with an insult to ego. And the insult occurs immediately. As soon as we try to sit and watch our breath and find out how difficult it is, what an insult. We can't do it. He says that he recommends no future planning, continuous exertion, a first glimpse of the world that does not exist in your mind. This is the non-theistic journey. At the beginning, this journey may seem to give you some profit, but you have nowhere to put it. It just evaporates. You seem like you're going to get something. You say to yourself, oh, I'm improving. And then where does that go? And you wake up and you still have to wash the dishes and, clean your body and take care of your friends and worry about the rent and all of that. And then you begin to realize that meditation is the only way. When I first heard him say that, I thought, oh God, that's terrible. It sounds like some kind of theistic true believerism. Meditation is the only way. But it is the only way. Because what meditation is giving up any attempt to try to hold on to anything and just coming back again and again to awareness. He says, as we practice, all sorts of patterns are churned up, attempts to solidify our trips. This is the Alaya again. The Alaya kicks out all of this stuff that has to do with self-aggrandizement, self-maintenance, self-improvement. It's all stored there in the Alaya in the form of likes and dislikes in memory. And as we practice, there are three main ways that the Alaya kicks out its contents. One is at night, when we fall asleep and we dream, the Alaya is churning out all those images. They come from our past. They are mixtures and conglomerations of our past memories that come out in dream. The second is, as we walk down the street and events trigger us, and also, or as we daydream, we've got nothing happening, we're bored, we're sitting and meditating, and we're conscious, and the Alaya is kicking out all kinds of dreams and thoughts. And we remember that person who slighted us. We remember that person who was nice to us. We remember that terrific meal we had. We remember stubbing our toe. All of these things are being churned out by the Alaya as a form of entertainment to keep ego, the sense of I, alive. And that needs a little bit of explanation that ego is constantly looking for something to do. Without anything to do, ego dies. It just evaporates, at least for the moment. And so it's always looking for an I-other game of some sort. And the alaya obliges. It kicks out fantasies of all kinds and projections and veils. And we see the world through these veils of the alaya, and they always have to do with passion, aggression, and indifference. So we see someone who we recognize walking down the street. They might be a perfect stranger, but they remind us of someone from our past. And immediately we have a feeling of liking them, disliking them, or of indifference to them. The third way that the alaya, and the third opportunity that the alaya has to kick out its contents, is in death. After we die, in the so-called 49-day period of becoming, the bardo of becoming, when we're moving towards rebirth, this is the quintessential time for the alaya to be kicking out all kinds of dreams. And these dreams propel us into our next rebirth, just as they do when we're awake. When we're awake and you get hungry and the alaya kicks out a vision of a piece of cake, and you think, as you're sitting there, you think, there's some cake in the refrigerator. I think I'll go have a piece. And you have been reborn now into the person eating that cake. And we have some cake in the refrigerator, by the way. So the only way to deal with this is through practice. In practice, we come back again and again to clarity of mind, back to awareness, which defeats the alaya, but also gives it a space in which to operate, to kick out things. So he says it is tremendously good news that we can actually short-circuit samsara by sitting practice. This is so important, that we are short-circuiting this whole samsaric process of me, I, self-aggrandizement, and the alaya and its constant churning out of neurosis through sitting practice. Because every time we practice sitting and every time we come back into the present moment, we are coming back to true sanity. He says, when you relate with your breath, you both cut the crops and take out the seeds. We're cutting the crops because you may be caught up in a fantasy of aggression. That son of a gun, they said something mean to me, I'm going to get even with them, blah, blah, blah. There's a fantasy of aggression. Whoops, I was dreaming again. Come back to the breath and you cut that. That's cutting the crops. And as you begin to come back again and again, and the alaya is kicking out the seeds, and you see them, those seeds of aggression, and you don't act on them, you are burning them up. In fact, the only way that you can deal with the memories, the seeds of passion, aggression, indifference, and all the rest that are stored in the alaya is by bringing them to awareness, seeing them clearly, and in that act, you burn them up, at least for a moment. And they say that you burn up those seeds in, and again, this is a very Buddhist thing, in 81 degrees. And those 81 degrees for each seed, 81 degrees, you do it by bringing them to awareness. And what happens is the alaya kicks them out and you get caught up in a dream, like, oh, I'm going to get even with so-and-so. And then you see it and you say, oh, I was dreaming again. And you've brought it to awareness. You have to do that in 81 times. This is so funny. And the 81 degrees are, you see that seed strong, strong, strong the first time. Then the second time it's strong, strong, medium. And then the third time it's strong, strong, weak. And then the fourth time it's strong, medium, strong. Get it? And you do this enough times, you get 81. I don't know how they work it exactly. But it's burning up these seeds. And that's how you begin through meditation, through bringing them to awareness and not dreaming, not being lost in the dream. We spend so much time lost in dreams. That's the way in which we burn up the seeds of the alaya, which are constantly propelling us into neurosis. And he says the Abhidharma lists what needs to be cleared out, and what needs to be cleared out are the 6 realms and any possibility of rebirth. And he says the idea is that we can actually cut the root of samsara by doing this. And when you say that we're clearing out the 6 realms, it's just what I've been talking about, that we're burning up passion, lust, jealousy, that's the jealous God realm, pride, the realm of the gods, anger, the hell realm, poverty mentality, the realm of the hungry ghosts, and stupidity, the realm of the animals. And we're burning them up by bringing them to awareness through the meditative process. First, by shamatha, when we are sitting on the cushion and we're coming back to the breath. And then as we begin to develop our vipassana, which is like, it becomes meditation in action, that we can practice both on the cushion and as we walk down the street, it becomes even more powerful. The non-theistic path I'm quoting here is all about egolessness. When you understand egolessness, when there is no ego, when you have cut through ego, that is the cessation of suffering. It is the definition of nirvana. That is something to remember. Nirvana, we've always heard about nirvana, right? There's a perfume named Nirvana. This isn't it. And what it is the absence of the suffering of ego. Ego, this sack of woe that we carry around, we call me, that we are worrying about all the time, me and my well-being. It's a constant suffering. And what an amazing thing to discover that it's a myth, that it was or as Trungpa Rinpoche once bellowed at me, it is a lie, he said. On the non-theistic path, we are trying to cut ego mind back by means of the sitting practice of meditation. We are working with ourselves in terms of individual salvation. Individual salvation means that at this level of the path, we're just working on discovering egolessness, which is my personal escape from suffering. Later in the Mahayana, we begin to be inspired by the idea of helping others, not just me. And then it becomes the twofold benefit, the practice, benefiting I and other. He says, we are not concerned with dogma. It's a waste of time. Worse than that, believing in dogma. We are simply trying to work with what is there, awareness. We are working with that which creates our pain and makes us crazy, which is belief. The belief in I and the belief in everything that attends to I, which is this constant interaction with I and other. At this point, theism is not a problem, though it could be present in your subconscious gossip or memory bank. But those memories are just flickers of mind, like yesterday's cup of coffee. About that. That's what ego becomes, the thought of I, just like yesterday's cup of coffee, stale. Finally, he's ending this. He says, what we are really concerned with is what we are now. And cutting the samsaric root now, the sooner the better. And the way we cut it, again, by practicing meditation, by coming back to awareness of this world as it arises in this present moment. Mindfulness is simply looking at ourselves and cutting the roots of bewilderment and jumpiness. It is full being there. And when you do this, even just a little, your ego is softened. Ego comes back less each time. So in regard to sitting practice, he says, the idea is constancy. This is our encouragement, because each time you sit, you get softened more and more, and it becomes more and more effective the more constant it is. If you do it once in a while, it's much less effective than if we do it every day. So we could have a discussion on what Michael presented, on what this chapter as well. Anything you would like, we've got about a half hour at the most. And Barry and Valerie, can you help with finding people who have a comment or a question?
Don't all speak at once now.
Kind of takes your speech away, this idea of non-existence as self. You
I have something.
know,
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael and John. Um, Off the cushion, the particular struggle I have is just what pops up and how I respond to that. It's like, oh, I just remembered something about my mother. Do I have to my samsaric self wants to go chase that down, do research. Oh, look for that. Um, I can't wait for tomorrow morning's meditation to address that. So I'm looking for what helps me in the moment that seed sprouts, and that's a struggle. What do I do with that? Thank you.
Hey, John, you're muted.
I was inviting Michael to speak.
Oh, okay. Um, I guess I have two thoughts, and I don't know if either of these will be helpful, but one is a lot of what we're talking about in terms of post-meditation experience or meditation in daily life is it's similar to what we experience when we come back in meditation and we realize we've been thinking, and there's just that moment of recognition. And at that point, we can just relax into that a little bit. Um, Similar to what happens often in meditation, it tends to occur in flashes and it might not last long. It doesn't work to try to hold on to it, but we still have those moments. And in that moment, if you wanted to be more analytic about it, Trungpa Rinpoche had a lot of problems with Western psychology because he felt that a lot of times it was building up a case history to blame someone for why we are the way we are. But what he did say is that whatever we experience is happening now in the present. So if there's a thought of mother or something else, it's happening now. It may be conditioned by the past, but it's happening now. And being able to separate out now from the past in terms of part of our recognition is I think, really helpful at that point.
Yeah, I'd like to say as well that the more we practice, see, as you walk down the street, there's so many triggers that trigger you into dream again. And really, we all can recognize dream when we wake up. We can wake up and we say, oh, I was dreaming, whether it be a daydream or a night dream. But when we're caught in the dream, we don't know it. We're just dreaming. We're lost in the dream. Oh, that's so and so. They said this to me, or I'm really attracted to this person, and how am I going to, make a relationship? And we get caught up in one dream or another, and then something wakes us up. Well, the more we practice sitting on the cushion, the more we can practice as we walk down the street, which is our vipassana, coming back to awareness. And it's much more difficult on the street, again, because we're so conditioned to dreaming. And when we're sitting on the cushion, we have much fewer triggers. You don't see that person who reminds you of your mother or whatever it may be. You're just looking at the wall in front of you. So the more we sit on the cushion, the more we begin to become familiar with recognizing the dream and coming back, the more we begin to be able to do it in daily life. Doing it in daily life is key. That is the really powerful part of harnessing the power of meditation. You sit on the cushion and it makes it easier to do it in daily life. You do it in daily life and it becomes much more profound.
I'd like to make a short pitch here for walking meditation. The walking meditation is kind of, I see it as a halfway point between sitting and daily life. I love walking.
Thank you.
Fred has a hand up,
Okay.
but I don't see him in the picture anymore. Oh, there he is.
And here I am. Yeah, Michael was talking about the, what are they called? The 4 stages of discrimination. You know, he was talking about, you know, he was having a tough time articulating the experiences. You know, I just love to share an experience of peak I've had, you know, like all this unification, it seems to be like leading to like egolessness and the 4 noble truths of suffering. And I had, after my car accident, I completely identified with suffering and being a cripple. And then suddenly like my suffering went away for like a minute or two. And it was a complete experience of egolessness. Like it just didn't exist anymore. Like I saw suffering and then like suffering could disappear within a flash. It was like where Chogyam Trungpa talked about potentially explosive, right? It's something you can't come back from. You know, it's like you get hooked by the teachings in some way. You know, it's like becomes planted in you, and that's what I was getting about this peak experience here. For this peak stage of discrimination.
I think that's right. And I think you're right that it all connects with egolessness. That it's a real point of transformation. I think that's why he talked about it as like being cut open from the inside. I had a little trouble with that as a metaphor, but I kind of get what I think he's talking about. It just seems very painful. And maybe part of it is. And I think that's part of the point too.
And I also think that it's very important to each one of us that we've had experiences and insights that make the teachings seem real and valid. And that's what inspires us to proceed along the path, even though we feel like we may feel that we have so far to go. It's been the extent to which we can actually feel some aspect of the teaching in our being and find it in our experience in the past and now, that we can come back to it. And that, I think, increases the more we practice and the more we study. Kurt.
Kurt, yeah.
Is it possible to be dreaming and not lost in the dream, where you are in thought and awareness? I guess I'll just leave it at that without going further into it. I mean, maybe I'll say more about that. Just that we talk about falling into dream of memory and these thoughts coming up, and I'm looking at it on a creative level of imagination, and I guess it's more of looking into a future or a potential and being aware of that in the process. Is that something that can be spoke of?
Michael, when you kind of.
Well, I think, first of all, we can be, it's not necessarily that thinking stops, and we can be present with a thought. So it's not, so in that sense, as long as we continue with a sense of presence, thoughts come and go. It's not, the point of practice isn't to eliminate thoughts. One way it was described that was helpful to me was that we're not trying to get rid of thoughts, but we're changing our attitude toward thoughts and our activities with thoughts. And the attitude is taking thoughts to be real. And that's what gets us caught in the dream. And the activity then is to engage with the thought, to elaborate further, or to go the other way, still taking the thought to be real, but then trying to reject or push it away because it's threatening or painful in some way. And I think if we, again, through the practice, we change how we see thoughts, it's exactly that. We just see thoughts, but we're not swept away in the same way.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
I think that there are definitely times, the more you practice, when you experience what he described in one of these chapters, 2 chapters, as non-meditation, meaning complete absence of thinking mind, just pure clarity, beyond any attempt to meditate. They often call that non-meditation because it's beyond any act of awareness. It's simply pure, unadulterated awareness. And this is the core of our being. When you get to the Dzogchen teachings, the great perfection teachings, they talk about this a lot. Also in the Mahamudra, that one can have these experiences of perfect, brilliant clarity of the world of the senses. Thought veils that clarity. It's like sunglasses. And when it clears, then the world of the senses appears very brilliantly. Sometimes they say that experience of seeing the brilliance of the sensorial world is the true meaning of magic. That doesn't mean that mind will stop. Mind keeps churning out thoughts. The very nature of mind, it's like the analogy is like the ocean and waves. The mind is the ocean. Waves are the thoughts that move through it. Ultimately, though, in the ultimate state, for people who have realized enlightenment and beyond, it is supposed to be beyond thought. I remember, we will get to this in the next volume. There's a page, I forget what page, I think it's 200, if you want to look it up, where he goes on and on and on about how you don't need thought. It's really funny. He just says it over and over again. You don't need thought. And we'll get there. But if you try to get rid of it, then that's another big thought.
Yeah. Using thoughts to stop thoughts.
Right. That's circular. Yeah.
Danielle has her hand raised.
Just one last thing. That's the reason we work with the out breath. The out breath, you breathe out, the breath goes out, you are the breath. And as the breath goes out, it's dissolving. You are dissolving into the space. And when you let go into the space completely, there's just this, beyond thought. Out breath, dissolve, pure space, awareness. Sorry, Danielle.
Okay. I was wondering, is there some people that kind of, when they start to recognize egolessness, it kind of slip towards like life being depressing and kind of a nihilistic point of view? I mean, and then having to balance with the cheerfulness, being there and with a cheerful attitude. I can see how some people could like start seeing egolessness as kind of depressing, if you're not focused on, I don't know, positive things. You know what I mean?
Anybody want to answer that? Mary or Laura? If Laura's still here. Yes, you are.
Ego thinks it's depressing.
Yeah.
Got it.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's great.
Understood.
I think it's depressing. You say you don't understand or you do?
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah, I do.
that was really good.
Perfect.
Judith.
Oh, Judith.
But one way you can spot that kind of thing, Danielle, I think, or that I spotted, is that it's an opinion. You know, it's judgmental, and it's an opinion, and that's a red flag that it's ego. When you wonder that way. And to me, that's always a clue.
Yeah, I think egolessness is terrifically good news. You know, that's the definition of the Dharma, good news. And egolessness is enormous good news. It brings to us the beauty and the magic of this world, this life, and freedom from suffering. The constant attempt to maintain one's self, one's ego, is such a drag.
A lot of work.
A lot of work. Takes you on endless ups and downs.
A lot of work for nothing.
Yes. That's the worst part.
Yeah. By definition, it's a lot of work for nothing. Yeah. I always tell this story. I mean, when I first met Trungpa Rinpoche, he was giving a talk about egolessness. And during the Q&A, I naively raised my hand and I said, well, don't you sort of need ego, to pay the rent and, take care of things and just handle practicalities? And he leaned forward in his chair. I was sitting on the floor pretty close, and he just bellowed with his eyes bulging out, ego is a lie. Scared the hell out of me. But not the ego out of me. Yeah. Isn't it amazing that all of us, or I assume, I mean, I'm just taking it for granted, forgive me if I make a false assumption, that all of us believe in ego. But if you contemplate that there have been countless sentient beings over the ages, right now there's 7.5 billion people on the planet. And I mean, think about how many uncountable numbers of sentient beings there have been just on the Earth, much less throughout the endless galaxies, And in all that time, there have been many, many uncountable people who have achieved enlightenment or who were enlightened. So maybe we're in the minority, actually. We think we're the majority, but maybe we're in the minority, those of us who believe in the self and are trapped in the suffering that attends that belief. Jane.
Okay, so can one separate ego from thinking? For example, very often during meditation, and I really agree with Barry, walking meditation is pretty powerful and effective. And I'll have a thought that's maybe worrisome or disturbing. I can't quite grasp it. And I just say, okay, let it go for now. I'm busy meditating, leave me alone. But what happens is when I'm off the cushion or finished walking or going about my daily business, I'll have an insight. I'll have a new thought of having resolved some conflict unconsciously while I was meditating. I don't believe that's ego. I believe that as a realization that comes from, being, spending the time on the cushion. Am I wrong in thinking that that kind of thinking is separate from ego, or is that as well ego?
Who wants to answer? Michael?
Well, if ego's present, then there's a sense of duality, a sense of I and other. So I think that would be one way to just begin to contemplate that experience. I think that I'm thinking of different things. There was a movie I saw once about a biographical film of Alan Watts. And he said that the conceptual mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And the point is that conceptual mind, when it works well, is a wonderful thing. I mean, if we have a surgeon operating on us or an engineer designing a bridge that we're going to drive over, we want their conceptual mind to be sharp and clear. But when we mistake concept for experience and get lost in concepts and lost in dreams, then that's something else. And I think moment to moment, we just have to look at our experience and just do the best we can to be as awake as we can be.
That's helpful. Thank you.
The
Is it a problem solving kind of thing, Jane? Like your mind will start working on something while you're meditating, and then the answer to it you drop it, and then the answer comes later. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about, or not?
No, I was trying to think of a specific example, but it's not that concrete. It's more like a feeling, I guess, than a thought that's discomforting, that's producing some anxiety, and you kind of know what it's about. And so if during sitting, if you just kind of say, okay, I'm feeling anxious about whatever I'm feeling anxious about, and then maybe later in that day or a day later, or as soon as I get up, I kind of have an aha moment. Oh, that was what was going on. So I'm just wondering if that's different from, it's an insight, it's a resolution of whatever was causing the anxiety, and then the anxiety goes away and anxiety is suffering. So I kind of think it's a positive, but maybe not.
No, there could be genuine insight. It could be genuine insight.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it could be a genuine insight. Again, the mark of ego is duality, a sense of I and other. And then starting from that fundamental mistake, creating an entire world.
Right. No, okay. I think I see the difference. Yeah, it's a subtle difference, but it is different.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just read you a paragraph. This is from the third volume on the Vajrayana. So it's getting a bit advanced, but it applies. He says, in the Mahayana, you try to quell your aggression and hatred for yourself with maitri, that's kindness for yourself. And you quell your hatred toward others with karuna, that's compassion, feeling for them. You have already had an experience of shunyata. Shunyata is the ultimate experience of egolessness, both egolessness of I and of other, that nothing has any true existence. You have already seen things as free from concepts. This means that you have seen the world stripped of concept, and that it emerges in a way that is very vivid and powerful and meaningful, because we are taking away our judgments of good and bad, And this is an actual experience that you can have in the moment that many people have had. It's just like a sudden rending of the veil. And you have already seen your thoughts as transparent, he says. In the Mahayana, everything depends on attitude and everything is done with diplomacy. But in this case, you cut thoughts abruptly, on the spot. You do not even take an attitude. Taking the Bodhisattva vow is committing yourself to an attitude. But in this case, you are not committing yourself to an attitude. You are committing yourself to the real thing. You just do it. It is very direct and precise. In the Vajrayana, you confront thoughts right away. Bang, 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 on the spot. You just do it. How to cut your thoughts in this manner would obviously be the next question, but there is no particular way to do it. The only thing I can say is that having developed genuine loyalty to the teachings of Vajrayana and dedication to the teacher, you just jump on the spot at your own thoughts. That is the only magic there is. No gunpowder or ingredients are involved, but cutting thoughts is the first way of blowing up the samsaric world. That's getting pretty advanced, but it's really beautiful.
Yeah, because that's not aggression if you're confronting the thought.
The thoughts are the aggression.
The thoughts of the aggression. Okay, that is advanced.
They all contain aggression of one kind or another, wanting things to be different. And it's really coming back, seeing things clearly as they are, to whatever extent we can. This is the practice. And this is why we sit on the cushion and meditate, why we endure the boredom. The boredom is ego, constantly looking for some game to play, to reaffirm its well-being and existence. And the frustration of not being able to find a good game. Well,
So more often than not, sitting on the cushion for me is a release from all that.
Yes.
That's just release.
Great.
It's like, okay,
That's the idea. Yeah, that's the net.
that's the motivation to keep doing it.
Yeah.
For me, I mean,
For everybody, yes.
it's it's freedom from all that. It's a release.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, it's not like that all the time, but very often. I mean, that one looks forward to have that hour, or in the evening, that half hour, because one may find that release, that relief.
Well said. Don't you think, Michael and Barry?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, we're.
And that's the problem with thoughts, is that they, we, rather than just seeing things as they are, we see things the way we think they are. That's why we sometimes are looking for something that's right in front of us. We're not really seeing, we're caught in the concept. When we let that go,
Yeah.
we can just see things exactly as they are. As simple as that, and as difficult as that.
Yeah, right. It's not simple.
Can I read one more thing here? One more?
No, we can't let, of course.
This is one of my favorite parts of all of the Profound Treasury. He says, that union or bringing together of the teacher and yourself, the teacher is the principle of enlightenment, makes it possible for you to work together. It is the experience of Dokpa Gak, the cessation or stopping of thoughts. By stopping thoughts, we are not talking about becoming zombies. We have to be quite careful about that. We cut conceptualization, but the natural functioning mind and general awareness still goes on continuously. In fact, it is cultivated further by the Vipassana experience, awareness. Later on, it becomes the upaya. So somebody's got something going here. I think, yeah. Later on, it becomes the upaya of the Vajrayana disciplines as well. So that particular aspect of mind could be sharpened. And here it is. There is never a need for conceptual thinking. You hear that? I'll repeat it. There is never a need for conceptual thinking. Nobody needs it. It is absolutely unnecessary because it produces pain and the unnecessary fortification of ego. That is what conceptual mind is for, to build your ego fortification. It is for me, for I. It is about how to be I, how to build myself up. And that is not necessary. There could be a world without I. That's page 400 of the third volume. I just love that page. Wow.
Peter.
Do we have Peter?
I thought Peter was going to ask. He's muted. You're muted, Peter.
Okay, so I'm thinking that I may just possibly be learning something. Uh, uh, in that my experience has often been, instead of feeling myself on the path to enlightenment, is on a path of disappointment. And the nature of that disappointment, often it is the opposite. I'm flying high and I'm amazed at the difference and so on, and how much more free I'm feeling and not judgmental and so on. And then I find myself kind of thinking, like falling it off. And then I get very disappointed. And I said, well, this is just all disappointing. What I think I may be learning this time and in these moments is that, of course, that I'm disappointed. And the reason that I'm disappointed is because I'm trying to maintain something, and that I get stuck in trying to maintain when I'm in a place that I'm really very happy about. I'm trying to keep it. And how stupid. And I think I may just be beginning to understand the how unfruitful that is, how impossible it is that I am only creating suffering and disappointment. Whereas if I just simply experiencing things as they are, which of course change constantly, that in one sense this thinking of myself of having arrived somewhere is not helpful and not real, I would say. The experience is real, certainly, but the effort to maintain it, and feeling, oh, well, I've arrived, and so on, is it's mistaken. But from what you people have been saying, from me sitting here and listening, I may, I can't promise, but I just may be finally understanding, what I have been calling disappointment as not being disappointment at all, and the role that I play in creating it, and that the beginning of an understanding that has been, I felt has been expressed here, is being able to just take a breath and not worry and just be with whatever's going on, and that's more reality than when my conceptual belief that the path is always direct and always one of getting things better and better. And I feel the more that I say this now, I'm maybe talking too much, I don't know, the freer that I begin to feel. And I don't know, I'm rather thankful for being here, because I've been sitting here first feeling a little bit grumpy and, oh, look what happened here and look what happened there. I was doing so well and stuff like that. But this is very beautiful for me. And I just want to express my thanks to all of you and everything that you've said, and the good feeling, the feeling that maybe I can allow myself to feel it, that I don't need to maintain anything that is not about maintaining